Thank you so much for having me here today in your state. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm so thrilled that so many of you have gathered to talk about this really critical issue of adult learners. I've founded Student Ready Strategies because I have the perspective about higher education that colleges should be student ready and not the other way around. And the thing I think that folks really need is not to be convinced of that, is to be helped to achieve that goal. So our cornerstone belief as Student Ready Strategies is that all students can succeed if we are ready to serve them and if we are ready to embrace their needs and what it's going to take to get them to graduation day. We don't believe in any exceptions to that rule. So when we think about who can succeed in higher education, it's all types of students, in our view, if we serve them well. I'm going to talk to you today about gardening. I'm going to talk to you about bowling, and don't worry, I'm also going to be talking about the role of adult students in achieving your 2 million by 2030. When we think about attainment goals, they are hard to meet because all of these things are hard to do, but the conceptual formula behind how you get to reaching your attainment goals is actually pretty simple. So you have to do 3 things. You have to graduate more of the students you have. You have to close achievement gaps so that all students are graduating at the same rate, and redefine and expand the pipeline of entering students. As I said, all those things is actually hard to do, but let's check in on where things stand now in terms of that first bullet of graduating the students that you have. So at 4-year institutions, nationally, about 6 in 10 students is graduating. And you can see that particularly for African American students and Native students, those numbers, those disparities are quite glaring. If we look at our 2-year colleges, the 3-year graduation rate, about 3 in 10 of those students is graduating. And when we do graduation rate charts like this, this is often how these are presented. I always think about the white space on a graph like this. So who's not shown on this graph? And it's the students that didn't graduate. So when we talk about the students who didn't graduate, that's the bigger part of the story in our higher education system. And these purple bars, that's your some college no degree population. That's your partway home population. So when we talk about adults, we have to recognize that many of these adults wanted to be part of that green bucket and ended up in the purple bucket because we were not ready to serve them. So that's enough data slides in a row. I get tired of doing data slides pretty quickly. So let's talk about gardening. And I want to tell you a story about a few years ago, I'd moved into a new home. I was watching a lot of Food Network shows, and I got convinced that to be a really good chef, I was going to have my own herb garden in my backyard. It was necessary. Everyone on Food Network goes into their backyard and pulls out their herbs. So I was going to do that. So I looked in my backyard. I found the spot where no grass was growing, and I thought, cool, I don't have to shovel it. It's ready to go. Went to Walmart, got some seeds, planted them. They didn't grow. And I thought, stupid Walmart. So I went to the fancy nursery, and I got, spent 3 times as much on a new set of seeds. Planted them, still didn't grow. But I'm determined, so I went to the nursery again, and I bought the actual plants, and I planted them in the ground, and they died. So what did I do wrong? You all started laughing when I said that there was no grass growing in the dirt, right? Obviously, it wasn't the seeds, it was the dirt. And you all knew that because as humans, we sort of conceptually and intuitively understand that the results of a system are the results of the environment. They're caused by the environment, right? So when we see a polluted pond or a fish dying in a pond, we assume it's pollution. When the lights go out, we call the electric company rather than changing our light bulbs. And you would absolutely never send your new puppy to a dog park if it didn't have a fence around it, unless you were really mad at that puppy. So in higher education, though, it's really hard for us to look inwardly and to look at the results of our system as a function of the system itself. I love these authors, and they really put it best, where they said, too many of us are beginning to absolve ourselves from responsibility associated with poor student outcomes. We place blame on either the individual student, the K-12 system, or broader societal challenges. But I can tell you, I've been in so many rooms where people want to own the results of the higher education system. And so many rooms where people kind of wrestle with this idea of, why does our system not get the results it was intended to get, or it was designed to get? There's a different way to think about this. And there's a sort of corporate philosopher, Edward Deming, who says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. So my herb garden was perfectly designed to kill seeds and to kill plants. Fenceless dog parks are perfectly designed to lose your puppy. Above-ground power lines are perfectly designed to leave you without power anytime there's a storm. So again, the system that we create with the best intentions, whatever the result is, that's what the system is currently designed to do. And we're here today to talk about adult learners. And to talk about adult learners, we have to acknowledge that there is an unofficial separate system of higher education for adult learners, which is the part-time model. Not all part-time students are adults, and not all adults are part-time students, but a lot of adults are encouraged, nudged, and put in a path of part-time enrollment. So we know that, but I want to quiz you a little bit on what the results of the part-time model are. Because I'm guessing a lot of people don't really realize, inside this room and outside, how different the results can be. So I'm going to quiz you. I'm going to let you talk to your neighbor for a minute, because an hour is way too long for you to just hear my voice. We're going to do 3 quiz questions. I'm going to pose the question. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about it, talk to your neighbor, what you think the result of this is, or the answer is, and then we'll come back together. So first question around expectations. What percentage of part-time students who are in their second college term say that they expect to earn an associate degree 1 to 2 years from entry? So in other words, what percentage of part-time students think they're on time to graduate in 2 years? All right, talk amongst yourself. All right, what do we think? Anyone have a guess? I heard 70, anyone else have a guess? 40? It's 47%. So when I think about a 47%, if it were 4.7% of part-time students that thought they were on track to graduate, I would say some students just didn't get it, didn't listen to the right people, didn't think about it. But 47% is system failure. All right, next question. Thank you for quieting down so quickly, by the way. I always get nervous doing that. Like I might just we might just have a cocktail party for the rest of this time if I let you talk. Okay, question around cost. What is the cost difference between a 2-year associate degree and a 6-year associate degree? Talk amongst yourselves. $560,000. It's a little bit of a trick question. I'm an economist. We really like these trick questions on exams. So when you think about the cost difference, you have to include the opportunity costs. So it's not just the extra tuition. It's actually the fact that they're not in the workforce using that degree to earn more money. They're not saving for retirement. They're accruing debt rather than savings. And with the debt and savings piece, and this gets a little nerdy, but those opportunity costs are for like a given year are pretty small, but then just like interest and everything else, it gets bigger over time. So the opportunity cost, as that interest would have accrued in retirement accounts, those opportunity costs grow over time. So that figure from a group called NerdWallet of $560,000, so that's our most vulnerable adults who are making the $20,000 a year. that we're asking to pay these costs by putting them in the part-time system. All right, last question around ultimately what we care about, which is student success. So what percentage of always part-time students graduate after 6 years? Talk amongst yourselves. All right, anyone have a guess? 10%. 10%? Anyone else? 20%? 5%? See, by the time we get to the third question, you're so demoralized that the guesses actually tend to come in low on this, but the actual answer is 20%. That doubles if students go full-time some of the time, and it doubles again if they go full-time all the time. So again, we have a system that we have created more or less as the best option for adults that has different expectations, that the students don't have accurate expectations about what that means in terms of time. It costs them $500,000 more, and their chances of success are dramatically lower. We mentioned earlier that adult students are not all part-time and all part-time students are not adults, but even if you combine part-time and full-time students and slice that by age, you can see that our younger students are significantly outperforming our older students. So every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. So our part-time system for adults in higher education is perfectly designed to take adults, have them spend more money, and in 4 out of 5 cases, add them to your some college no degree population. So what do we do about that? Now that you're demoralized, let's talk about how we change, how we fix, how we evolve. We go back to this formula of graduate more of the students you have, close achievement gaps, redefine and expand the pipeline for students. You're going to hear from folks from the Graduate Network later in your day about efforts to reach out and bring back significant numbers of adults back into the higher education system. Those with some college no degree and those with no college and no degree. That is a really critical part of this formula. So that's all part of that redefining the pipeline, expanding the pipeline. You don't get to your goal without doing that work. But the other 2 pieces are critically important as well. I'm going to do a little back of the envelope math. So it's almost Valentine's Day. I used a red envelope this time, even though it's not part of my color scheme. So if 3 out of 10 adults that come back into higher education end up graduating, we do all sorts of community outreach and marketing, and we reach those former students, potential students. They make the decision to come back. 7 of them will add to the some college no degree population or stay in the some college no degree population, and only 3 are going to affect your post-secondary attainment rate. So unless we can change that percentage of students that are graduating and to close achievement gaps in that percentage of students who are graduating, you're going to do a lot of work and not be able to make a lot of progress if all that happens is a focus on sort of the marketing and bring them back aspect. Again, it doesn't happen without that, but it has to have all 3 of these pieces to truly be successful and to make adequate progress so that you can reach your goal. So how do we do this? I'm not going to teach you about andragogy today, which is the sort of counterpart of pedagogy, so this is how adults learn. I'm going to use it on you, because you're adults and I'm trying to teach you something. So one component of andragogy is that adults learn best when they're problem solving. So I'm going to ask you today to think about higher education, to do some problem solving, and to do that on behalf of a couple students. First, though, before we do that, because I got ahead of myself, I do want to go and talk about one other thing you weren't expecting me to talk about today, which is bowling. Anyone taking a kid bowling? So I thought it would be fun to take my daughter Evie bowling one day, and kids do this thing where they've got the squat and push method. So the ball sort of goes really slow and it wobbles and it's painful and eventually it ends up in the gutter. And then they have this other method, which is this sort of, I call it like the indiscriminate hurling of the ball. And you get a little bit more speed, a little bit more momentum, and it goes right into the gutter even faster. That makes Evie look like this. I have this mom hack, so when my kids are crying or unhappy, I just look and find happy kids and just do whatever their parents are doing. And that's how I found this ramp. So the kids that were happy and that were, bowling strikes had this ramp that they can use it to aim. They can push the ball. It creates the speed and momentum for them. And when Evie used that, she looked a little bit more like this. So that was a kid-ready bowling alley that had that ramp. And I use this metaphor because I really like to think about the work we need to do to be student-ready institutions as bringing in those ramps. Not asking students to be any different than who they are when they show up at our door, but to be ready for them, and to create structures like this ramp that didn't make Evie stronger, smarter, more coordinated, but it helped her be a better bowler because it was built for her. So, now we're problem solving. I want you to think about higher education through the lens of 2 adult students, and we're going to do some problem solving for them. So first, let me introduce you to Donna. Donna went to college right after high school, but a couple semesters in, she got pregnant and dropped out to raise her child. Her son is now in high school, and he's thinking about college. Maybe I should go back and finish what I started. But she's terrified that it's going to turn out the same way it did before. And then I want to introduce you to David, who never went to college after high school. He just took the best job he could get, and he's been working that job for 20 years. He's not making progress in his career, and he knows that if he ever wants to get promoted, make more money, he's going to have to get that degree. So we're going to talk about 3 different culprits in higher education that make it really difficult for people like Donna and David to come back. And the first is the unworkable schedule. So when Donna sat down with her advisor and said, I want to come back, I want to finish what I started, her advisor said, hey, you're working, you've got a son, I think your probably best bet is to go part-time. And she said, well, I don't think I could handle more than 1 or 2 classes at a time, so that's probably right, so let's do that. But she wasn't advised to the data that we saw earlier around the fact that she was much less likely to graduate and would spend a lot more time and money doing it that way. David has problems with schedule because he's seen some other coworkers approach his boss and say, hey, can I have some flexibility in my work schedule? And the answer was no. So David's quite certain that if he's going to go back and get a degree, it's going to have to be nights and weekends, and he really doesn't have 4 nights a week to spend, so it's probably going to need to be something that fits into a 1 or 2 night on campus per week. So what does an adult student-ready schedule look like? This first point I can't stress enough is we don't want to ask our adults to take 5 classes at once. But we also don't want to ask them to take 8 years to graduate. So 1 or 2 courses at a time is really good for adults because they're balancing everything else. I have work deadlines, I have child care responsibilities, I have parent care responsibilities, I have all sorts of things I'm juggling. I can't juggle 5 different sets of deadlines for 5 different professors and 5 different study groups. We shouldn't ask them to do that. But there is a better way to design a 1 or 2 course at a time model, which is to do shorter terms. So 1 or 2 courses at a time. If it's a 1 course at a time model, it's a 4-week course, and they're making progress. And you can still graduate on time with that model. The other thing that's nice about those compressed courses is that when inevitably life gets in the way for adult students, it's much better to drop 1 4-week course halfway through it, 2 weeks in, than to drop 5 16-week courses when you've already maybe invested 10 or 12 weeks in those courses. So you're able to progress those things that could be disastrous don't need to be disastrous in terms of life events if we have a shorter term model. The other thing that's really critical is consistent days and times on campus. So when adults are going back, making a commitment, they want to get through the program, they know that if I can carve out Wednesday nights and spend time doing hybrid courses at home, I know that I can do that for the next 2 years or the next 4 years. And then the other piece is building it around a typical workday. You hear a lot about nights and weekends, and I think most of the time that's right. Nights and weekends is what's sort of around a typical workday. But consider if your sort of target population includes a lot of parents. During the school day might actually be the best time because the children are at school. You have time to work or to go to school during that time. There are some towns that have a big employer that's on a shift schedule. So if you have a shift that ends at 3:45 and all your classes start at 3:15, that's problematic. But you could start classes at 4 o'clock. So just thinking about who your adult student base is, what their lives are like, and then building a schedule around that, again, helps to problem solve for that culprit. Culprit 2 is the high maintenance relationship. So when I think about a student's relationship with an institution, has 2 parts. So you have things that happen inside the classroom with faculty members, but then you have all the other things, all the other ways that a student interacts with the institution. So the institution helps them enroll in classes, calculates their tuition, applies their financial aid, sends them a bill, collects money. There are forms to fill out, there are processes to complete. And all those things happen in a lot of different offices all across campus. So Donna's business relationship with her institution was that when she had a question, she wasn't quite sure where to go. She didn't know the difference between a bursar and a registrar, like many of us wouldn't have before we were involved in the system. And so she would call someone and tend to get bounced around a lot to different offices. And then when she would finally figure out, okay, this is where I need to be, she would typically have to take some time off work because that office would close at 4:30. And then David's problem is he was just thinking about going back, was just not even knowing where to start with an admissions process, but also not even knowing what institution to go to. So he wasn't sure, he could look online and do some research, but it's really hard for him to tell what's the difference between a high-quality institution and an institution that's just trying to make a profit. So adult student-ready support can look like a lot of different things. So a re-enrollment concierge, again, you're going to hear about some of this later today. Someone to just be your point of contact as an adult as you walk through figuring out where to apply, how to apply, and ultimately enrolling in the institution. The support and the coaching need not stop there and shouldn't stop there. So having student success and navigation coaches throughout the educational journey has proven to be really critical in increasing those graduation rates when an adult has someone to turn to who can help them navigate anything. Streamlined procedures. If it's a low-maintenance business relationship with the institution, then those adults might not need to rely so heavily on a navigator if the road is straighter, if there aren't as many turns and twists to take. And then thinking about extended business hours for campus offices is also really critical for making sure that adults can do the outside the classroom things they need to do to stay enrolled. The last culprit I want to talk about is repeat material. So when Donna decided to go back, she went to a different institution than she had originally attended. So she needed to get a transcript. So the first thing she did, she went to this online system, and it was asking her sort of security questions where she had to say, what semester did you take Psych 101? She's like, I don't know, it was 20 years ago, I don't remember. So she got someone on the phone, and then she found out she had about $100 in parking fees that she had to pay. So she scrapes the money together, gets that paid off, gets her transcript moved over, and then finds out that none of her credits are going to apply to her degree because they are expired, which is academic speak for you learned it too long ago, so you need to learn it again. So that was her experience. David's experience is a little different in that he's been out in the workforce, and he's been learning a lot while he was out in the workforce, and he's seen a lot of college grads come in at positions above his in his organization, and typically he knows a lot of the things they know, and he knows a lot of things they don't know. But when he goes to an institution, because that learning happened outside of their walls, typically he's not going to be awarded college credit for that. So an adult student-ready onboarding system is one that has a standardized across-the-board process for awarding prior learning assessment. Most of your institutions offer prior learning assessment. They don't necessarily walk students through a process to maximize the number of credits they can get. Adult student-ready onboarding has generous and common sense transfer and transcript procedures. and an adult-focused orientation. So this is also really important because your orientation is kind of your first impression with your adult students. Putting them in the same room with 18-year-olds who are learning how to manage their time and how to avoid the dangers of alcohol and things like that can actually be quite insulting for adults. So having an orientation process that embraces their life experience and that they have learned the life lessons that many learn while they're in college can also help you make a really good first impression and let that adult student know that you understand them. So we've talked exclusively about what colleges and universities can do to serve adult students, but I know many of us in the room are not directly working for an institution. So you might be a community stakeholder, work for a philanthropic organization. So I also want to talk about your role in supporting this work toward post-secondary attainment. So things that you can do as non-college personnel is reinforcing the value of higher education within the community. I hear a lot that people say higher education is under attack. So if that's true, you can be its defender and talk about its value, its return on investment, all the work that we've heard from Cecilia earlier. That's critical work into helping reinforce the value of higher education. Cultivating interest in college within the community citizens goes right alongside that. Connecting social services to institutions, so not expecting institutional financial aid to solve all financial problems, but rather having a streamlined sort of process or seamless process for helping students with food insecurity, housing insecurity, students in need of childcare, helping them connect with resources outside of the institution so that they can create sort of a basket of support to help them meet their goals. And then facilitating employer connections to colleges and universities. That's always so hard because faculty and employers don't typically speak the same language. But helping to strengthen those connections between your employment base and the colleges and universities that are training students to go into that economy can be something that you can help with if you're outside of an institution. I want to sort of conclude remarks today with talking to you about my personal why. So I've walked through a lot of data. We can talk about economic need, workforce, all those reasons why post-secondary attainment matters. But the reason I get up every day and do this work and stand on stages like this is very personal to me. So I'm going to, for this last piece, ask you to not see higher education through David and Donna's eyes, but rather to see it through Evie's eyes, our young bowler. So my husband, Mark, was absolutely miserable in his job. And to do the career change that he wanted to do, he needed to go back and get a different degree. So my children at very young ages, they're older than that now, so this always gets me a little choked up to see them looking so little. They watched him go through that journey. I was a traditional age student, so I could tell them education was important. Mark showed them what it meant. And he was going to teach them something about higher education one way or another. If he succeeded, he was going to teach them that your hard work pays off, more fulfilling career, happier daddy. If he hadn't succeeded, like the majority of our adult students don't succeed, he would have taught them something incredibly different. If their dad, their hero, couldn't succeed in this, they likely would have walked away with the idea that this is not for people like us. This is not worth my time. This is going to lead to disappointment. So we have an opportunity to change that narrative by making sure more of these adults succeed. Fortunately, Mark succeeded, I'm proud to say, and he had this joy of walking into his commencement ceremony escorted by Evie. And my son Jude, I remember him sitting there and sort of looking out at all the hats, and he said, "Mom, why are they wearing funny hats?" And I said, "Because it's an important day." And he just sort of understood that. They were both in kind of awe of this ceremony of celebrating success and accomplishment. This was my favorite moment. Mark's walking in, the kids are kind of staring back at him. He turns the corner, and he was so proud of himself in that moment, and he's proud of his kids always, and the kids were so proud of him in this moment. And they saw each other and locked eyes, and then you can just see it beaming from his face. Just what a great moment that was. And it was a great moment for me, sort of standing and watching it and thinking, this is my children's view of what college means. And I couldn't teach them that. He showed them. And we have an opportunity to create that moment for so many more of our adults and our citizens. And I firmly believe that if we do, we will strengthen the fabric of our country through a shared value of education. Cecilia said, Y2K was yesterday, and I really appreciated that because I want to encourage you to think about 2030 as tomorrow. I had a colleague when I worked at the Indiana Commission who he managed a lot of grants, and so you have a lot of deadlines. You're always sort of thinking about when do I need to do this and that. And whenever someone would come and say, when is this due, he would say tomorrow. It could be 3 months down the road. It's tomorrow, start working on it. And so I think about, 2030 is tomorrow. And there are states that set attainment goals for 2020 and didn't appropriately recognize how quickly they needed to start working and how urgently they needed to start working to be able to meet those goals. So I encourage you to approach this with a sense of urgency, a sense of gravity, and to do everything that you can to improve the lives of these adult students when we welcome them back. So I will not help you with an herb garden. I will not offer to help you with an herb garden. I will not take your children bowling because I'm not good at that either. But if you are committed to your institutions being adult student ready and your community being ready to welcome adult students back to higher education, I'm stand here able and willing to help you with that. With that, I'll take some questions. Yes, I think we have microphones. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Dr. Denise Henning. I'm from University of North Carolina, Wilmington, UNCW 3C Collaborative. This is in regards to the economic impact, and I wrote it down. So, we've had an economic analysis and research that indicates that there was oppressive challenges that occurred in North Carolina in 2008 as a result of the recession. The indicators are that it will occur again in North Carolina if we don't change the huge divide between urban and rural disparity in the state. So it appears that we're not focusing on education and focusing on it as a rural reality, which is very different from the urban reality, and where a majority of the poor and the unemployed reside. And also, we seem to be consistently not including Indigenous or First Nations people in that discussion, because I am an enrolled member. And so I have a concern on how we are going to reach this if we don't address these specific areas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the conversation around rural communities and higher education has gotten much more robust in recent years, which I think is a wonderful thing for the field. I think in your rural communities, you have two kinds of challenges. So there are some purely logistical. Is there a higher education institution that is nearby that is serving the population? Or if not, what are the transportation challenges and other challenges? We know that our rural communities tend to not have as many sort of resources, have lower median income, so there are financial challenges there as well. There are other sort of more sort of societal or cultural challenges that I've heard from folks in rural communities, which is kind of related to this idea of, if I send my son or daughter to college, will she come back? Or is there a job, back in our hometown for someone if they get that education? And so I think there are issues and concerns of valid, very real concerns of families in rural areas as it relates to higher education about, what are the implications of that in terms of where my family lives and what we do. So I don't have a lot of answers, but I do think that the conversation is really important, and that when we think about student-ready institutions, that we think about the needs of rural students as a particular pocket of students that we do need to be ready for in a unique way.
Good morning. My name is Alicia Hicks, and I'm from Halifax Community College. How can we prepare or efficiently work with our adult students when the focus is more or less on early college students now?
I think it starts, that's a great question, thank you for that. And I think it really starts with setting a priority for adults. I think a lot of institutions have oriented around traditional age students, or in fact, to your point, many community colleges are dramatically expanding their early college and sort of dual credit offerings as a way to drive enrollment and prepare students earlier. Institutions that tend to be very focused on that population, it's typically because they just haven't made a decision to focus on the adult population or haven't made a push for that. So, creating it at the leadership level, creating a strategic priority around serving adults, and either implementing things that work for adults and implementing them for all students. I mean, younger students can benefit from shorter term courses, for example, or accelerated courses. So either taking that approach, or some institutions have sort of created a separate pathway for adults, perhaps in the 3 to 4 majors that are most aligned with the workforce need in the area, and created a sort of a separate pathway through the institution and through the curriculum for adults that's more tailored toward them. So there are 2 different ways to approach it, but if it's not a priority, it won't happen.
Hi, Cindy Barr from Appalachian State University. Change is hard, and so I'm curious to hear more about how you work with colleges and universities who may have been traditionally focused on students coming right out of high school. How do you work with leadership, faculty, and staff at an institution to have that adult student focus, and what are some best practices we might take back to our campuses to help support our leadership in that transition?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Yeah, like I said earlier, the formula for getting to your attainment goal is easy, but doing the actual work is very, very hard. One of my best tactics is, when talking with faculty, is to find a peer-to-peer sort of relationship that I can bring someone in. Faculty in particular, once they start teaching adult students, find that they really like teaching adult students. We often have this deficit mindset about adults, that they have so many challenges, but really, when faculty start teaching adults, they realize these are motivated students. They know why they're there. They love learning. They can apply their learning immediately in their life and their job, which gets them even more excited about it. So I think getting folks that have that experience to come in and explain to a faculty member who maybe doesn't have that experience what it's like to teach adults can be really powerful. And then also, just sort of with faculty in particular, giving them an opportunity to try it. To not say, okay, you're now the adult program faculty member, but would you teach a class of adults? And then, again, many faculty who do that find these are really great students to teach and really great classrooms to be in. There are a lot of, when you think about best practices, I mean, I've listed some, and I'm happy to share these slides if I didn't mention that already, but I would say if you're gonna really hang your hat on anything, accelerated terms, embracing learning that happens outside of the classroom through PLA or other mechanisms, and then having some sort of navigation or coaching, those would be the 3 things I would really place my bets on. I don't see anyone else standing up. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for your commitment to this population. I look forward to hopefully working with you more as you work to achieve these goals. Thank you.